Hello, and welcome to Book Solid, New Canaan Library's podcast for adventurous readers across all genres. I'm your host, Kathleen, a collections librarian.
I'm your host, James, a reference and instruction librarian.
And I'm your host, Kat, a children's librarian.
And today we are discussing Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So before we get started, I just wanted to make a podcast announcement, which is that we are going to be taking a break after this episode, taking a break for the next 2 months, coming back in February. Stay tuned for the end of the episode where we will reveal the spring lineup.
So Piranesi is a fantasy book, but it's also kind of a mystery, maybe even some thriller elements. So definitely pay attention to the spoiler warning. We will be spoiling and discussing the entirety of Piranesi. It's a short book, a little under 250 pages. So go read it and then come back and listen.
All right, and with that warning out of the way, here is the plot summary. So Piranesi is a young man, and he lives in a place he calls the house. It's a labyrinthine and possibly infinite structure composed of thousands upon thousands of hallways, vestibules, staircases, and interior courtyards. While Piranesi spends his days exploring the halls, avoiding the changing tides of the interior ocean, tending to the skeletons of those who walked the halls before him, and gathering supplies to sustain himself, he also works with a man he considers his friend called the Other, who tasks Piranesi with helping the Other search for some kind of great truth or hidden secret that he believes will grant them incredible magical powers. This routine is disrupted when Piranesi discovers signs of another person being in the house, which sets in motion a series of events that reveal some sinister truths. He's been lied to, betrayed, and used as a tool. Piranesi learns that he used to be a person named Matthew Rose Sorensen, who was investigating what happened to a strange group of academics who believed that there was a way into other worlds. When he went to interview one of the few remaining academics who was not either missing, in prison, or unwilling to talk, he was forcibly thrown into this other world. The one who threw him in was the Other, really a man named Val Ketterly, who used the properties of the house to make Matthew forget who he was and become a resource for his futile pursuit of knowledge, renaming him Piranesi as a sick joke. After uncovering these shocking secrets, the third person in the house is revealed to be a police officer named Sarah, who has been trying to find Matthew. During a dramatic confrontation, Ketterly dies after being swept away by the ocean within the house, and Piranesi leaves the house with Sarah, but is able to return to the space wherever he wants, having developed a deep connection to the house.
So the really fun thing about coming to this book for this episode is that we've all read it before, right?
Yep.
Yes.
What do we think about it on a reread?
I think I like this book a lot more on my reread. I remember the first time I read this book being impressed with the setting, but a little bit annoyed about where it went and how the setting was used. But on this revisit, I'm a lot more just kind of impressed overall about how everything unfolds in this book.
So this is also my second reading, and I was excited to reread it, but also a little apprehensive because I love this book so much the first time that I read it. And since so much of it is a mystery that unfolds, and there's a lot of kind of the puzzle box quality of what is going on, you get thrown into it, really not knowing what this house is, what's going on with the Piranesi character. I wondered if having taken away that part of the equation, knowing basically what the reveal is, if there would still be a lot for me. And I loved it just as much.
I'm with you, Kathleen. I loved this book so much the first time I read it, and I was also nervous to revisit it. But I don't think I really had a reason to be nervous. And it's interesting because I remembered it as kind of more fantasy than it is, which brings me to the question of genre. This is our fantasy pick for the season as kind of a gateway into the genre. And I think what makes it a strong gateway is that it has quite literary writing and it has kind of a mystery plot while still maintaining the portal fantasy element.
Yes, the fantastical elements are pretty limited in this to the space itself and a little bit of kind of gestures toward ritual into how people originally accessed this space. Outside of that, the house itself doesn't really seem to have, like, people aren't throwing fireballs at each other. It's not, people aren't having magic duels. They're exploring a place from time to time, and that's the strangeness of the place is the kind of magical fantasy-like quality that you get from this book.
I think initially my impression of it was that it was much more of a fantasy because I was coming into it as someone who doesn't read a lot of fantasy. So I think there is maybe that learning curve with, like, what is this house? It is such a fantastical space and something that definitely, as you're starting the book and you're immersed in that, it feels so far removed from this world that I was thinking, oh, it must be fantasy. But as you get the reveal of what's going on, and when I thought about it this time, because I did know what was happening and because I was able to see the limits of how fantastical it was, this time I didn't really think of it as much as fantasy, and maybe that was the way it worked sort of as a gateway for me, but also probably something more approachable.
Yeah, and I think Piranesi is kind of a fantasy character who doesn't know at the start of the book that he is, in fact, in a mystery story. Until he starts literally piecing together clues with paper he finds lying about. And also, the book opens with a quote from one of the original Portal Fantasy books, The Magician's Nephew. Catterley in this novel is a name taken directly from that book. It's throwing a red herring at you right at the start.
There's a lot of references to the kind of Narnia-esque qualities that the house and this story is leaning into. The house is full of not just these endless halls and things like that, but within these halls and staircases and vestibules are numerous statues of different kind of people and mythological creatures and things like that. And Piranesi's favorite statue is of a faun. And when he thinks of the faun, he remembers like a winter's night, a lamppost, and a girl in like the winter, which is obviously the opening of the Chronicles of Narnia. So there's very much that connection. Susanna Clarke is very much in tune with C.S. Lewis. She's stated too that C.S. Lewis was a huge inspiration to her for this. She had found him at a very impressionable age, and she says that like he organized the inside of her head, and then she's been that way ever since. So with that kind of lens, when you read this book, it's a lot more understandable. You're like, oh, yep, I see what you're going for here.
So should we talk about Piranesi as a main character and like Piranesi's multiple selves we see throughout the book? I think when I first read this book, a big part of my love for it, and a big part of my love for it on the reread, is Piranesi, the character. He is someone who is highly empathetic. He's very scholarly. He cares deeply about all living things. He cares about the birds of the house. He cares about the dead and taking care of the dead. And that level of care and empathy is not something you see being paid a lot of attention to in protagonists. And of course, he is one part of the main character, is Piranesi. Because it's sort of revealed that the house kind of made him that way.
Yeah, it's heavily implied, and the other characters who claim to have some sort of knowledge of the house and its mechanics say that extended time spent within the confines of the labyrinth, as they often call it, can adversely affect one's mind, their memory. They'll repeat conversations they've already had. They'll forget things. They'll forget places they've been or the fact that they are from other places, that kind of stuff. So it does seem to have some kind of mental effect just inhabiting that place.
And it's interesting because the house is sort of made up of archetypes, right, in the form of the statues. Arne Sales sort of believed that ideas seeped into this other world and sort of made this other space.
Yeah, Arne Sales, the head of that group of academics who believed that the people used to relate to the world differently in ancient times, and that kind of relation allowed them to make reality itself more malleable. So Arne Sales believed like magic was possible then, it's not possible now because we reoriented that thinking, but when we changed how we thought about it, that way of thinking went somewhere, and he hypothesized, well, it would have gone into a place like this and then tried to get there. And he believes that the house is that place. Is the house that place? Who knows?
Who can say? And Piranesi himself, to get into the house, Arne Sales says you have to return to the state of mind or the place you were in when you last believed that reality was malleable, which is like a childlike place.
The last place where one had stood before the iron hand of modern rationality gripped one's mind.
Yes.
Again, think Narnia.
Think Narnia! And the house kind of turns Matthew Rose Sorensen, who's kind of cynical. He's really interested in the Arne Sales story in part because it's going to get him attention, which, no judgment, that's who he is. And Piranesi is someone who would never approach it in that way. And it returns him almost to this childlike state who does things like look at the birds to try and tell the future, and who believes that the house is communicating with him and the world is communicating with him.
I think that was a really interesting reveal when Piranesi starts to discover that he was Matthew Rose Sorensen and we get a glimpse into his journals. So Piranesi keeps journals. This is kind of a constant in his character, but they're very different from the time when he's in the house versus earlier when he's compiling notes on Arn's sales, and he's just a very different person. So I think that reveal, though, was very interesting to me to see just the vast difference in this person, how he became, as you said, more childlike, more open, kinder, and I think that was a very fun juxtaposition for me, a very interesting juxtaposition, and I think it was also nice reading this on a second time to understand just how much, I guess you would call Piranesi, an unreliable narrator. But I could read his journals differently, knowing what was going on and seeing what he did know or what he didn't know. But also the ways that he constructed his world, I think that was a lot clearer to me. I mean, we do see things where you can see when he switches over from, like 2011 or whatever the year is to how he names them kind of very fancifully.
The year the albatross flew into the upper western halls versus
Exactly.
2011, yeah. You can also see, it appears that he had some kind of really serious break at a point because when he was Matthew Rose Sorensen first put into the house, he documented kind of what was going on for a little bit, and then it seems like he destroyed his journals and then kind of reinvented himself as someone who could live in this strange space. But you can see how that changes too, because when he goes to find his old self again to find out about Matthew Rose Sorensen, like at one point he finds that seagulls have been using the pages of his journal as like nesting material because there's so little nesting material in the house, and he waits for the seagulls chicks to be born before he goes and gets the note pieces because he wants to be nice to them. And it's like if I was in a life or death situation in a magic strange house, I might not be waiting for the seagulls babies to be born, but Piranesi is like, of course I'm going to wait for this. Like,
we both live here, and I think part of that is being so lonely, which is a point we're going to get to. But I think I want to really stress like how incredibly Clarke paces out the reveals, because the writing style over the course of the book shifts to reflect Piranesi integrating the parts of himself in a way that is genuinely so masterful, especially on a reread. And Piranesi hypothesizes as well that the house wants to create a child or a witness to itself. And that's Piranesi's hypothesis. And as someone who spent the most time in the house, I think we can trust him with it. And so it's interesting to think about the house as both this beautiful and incredible and inspiring space, and also perhaps a threat to your sense of self.
I think certainly there's a sublime quality, something beautiful and terrifying. I mean, this space, the descriptions are quite lovely. It really immerses you in that, but it's also a frightening book in a sense. I mean, this is a place that I think with Piranesi, he is able to find a way to survive in the house maybe longer than other people. He thinks that the house is kind of providing for him and looking upon him favorably. But these are harsh conditions. These are, with the tides, for example, there are dangerous situations constantly going on in the house, and he has to learn the timetable of the tides. He has to learn the character of the house in order to live peacefully in it.
Do you want to talk about the house for a moment here, the setting of the kind of more fantastical elements of the book?
Yeah, let's do that.
So we've been mentioning the house a lot, and we kind of gave a little description of it, but I think what we really need to stress is that this is a phenomenal space. This is an incredible invention that Susanna Clarke has created. It is as you said, it's a terrifying, beautiful, lonely, profoundly lonely place. It's an example of what people have called like a liminal space. There's different definitions for it, but it's kind of usually referring to like empty or abandoned places that are like usually have kind of eerie elements to them. They're forlorn, sometimes they're surreal. They're commonly places of transition. Think something like, instead of like a house that you would live in as like an airport. An airport's a place you go to another place. Or a mall, it's a place where you go to shop. It's not a place where you live.
Or a gas station.
Or a gas station. It's a place where you go somewhere else. And the house is built of spaces that take you to other places. Stairways, hallways, vestibules. There's no bedrooms in the house. In the course of the book, there's one room we get that looks not like other rooms, and the difference is it just doesn't have windows and it has one door. That's it.
Yep.
And Piranesi is like, this is a weird place. It's a strange place. It's kind of really far down the hallway. And the house is also, it's divided into like 3 spaces. You have the upper levels, which is where the clouds live, because there's clouds. There's interior weather in this house. That's where he gets his water from. There's the lower levels, which are taken over by the interior ocean that just happens to be in here. Side note, the author has described this book as being in a house in which an ocean is imprisoned, which is a really fascinating description of what the house is.
I wonder if you think about like the ocean as a metaphor for the subconscious, like a place where the subconscious is imprisoned.
Because it's interesting too, because the house is also not timeless.
Yes.
It's a seemingly infinite place, but not timeless. There's a wing of the house that Piranesi says is crumbling. It's falling apart. And the tide also destroys things. And when water drips on statues, the statues have like divots in them from the flow of time. So it's not a timeless space. So it's a place that was not meant for people to live in. Mm-hmm. It's aging. There's no one taking care of it. Piranesi is here for 8 years alone.
Poor guy. It's also interesting because the people who leave the house, Piranesi and a character we haven't mentioned yet, Ritter, who was previously imprisoned by Arden Sales when trying to discuss the house, love the house. Even Sarah, the police officer, wants to come back and periodically visits. Ritter has a mental breakdown after he's like found by police, and he wants to return so badly. And he later finds a job with, I think, like a marble staircase in it. And he says the only reason he's able to cope is because the staircase reminds him of the house. It is a place that is longed for and that is inherently hostile at the same time, which absolutely fascinates me.
I don't know if it's hostility too.
It's also maybe indifference.
It's a strange indifference.
A strange indifference. And, you know, Arden Sales and Ketterly, I mean, especially Ketterly, Arden Sales has given up on this by the time Piranesi starts. But Ketterly is convinced that there is a secret magical knowledge that will allow him to do things like fly, communicate with animals that's hidden in the house. And Piranesi disagrees with this. He thinks even if there is that knowledge, it shouldn't be sought for, because the whole point of the house is just to exist and be in communion with it. And that's one of the first scenes, actually, when he says that to Ketterly, and Ketterly's like, we've already had this conversation. You're losing your mind. Where you begin to suspect everything in the book, actually.
I think Piranesi says, like, the search for the knowledge has encouraged us to think of the house as if it were a sort of riddle to be unraveled or a text to be interpreted. But if we ever discover that knowledge, then it will be as if the value is wrested from the house, and then all that is left is just scenery. And then he concludes, like, the house isn't valuable because of that. The house is valuable because it's the house. It's enough in and of itself. It's not a means to an end. Yeah.
But the house isn't everything. It is extremely lonely, and a big part of this book is isolation.
Yes.
So yeah, in this world, Piranesi has counted the people. He, as I think we mentioned, he tends to the dead. He's found the bones of, is it 13?
I think it's 13 people.
13 people, and then he and the other are 14 and 15, and he has this idea of, I think initially he longs for another person to be there, and then there's the introduction by the other of this concept of 16, who Piranesi is initially under the impression is his enemy, because that's what the other tells him. But then as he discovers that the other is sort of his actual enemy, 16 is someone else, and that turns out to be the police officer.
It's interesting that you mention that too, because it's implied that a few of the bodies there are identified as the academics who Arden Sales and Ketterly kind of went in with to explore. Some of them died in the house from the tides or from accidents. But then the rest of the people are, it doesn't seem like they were the original inhabitants of the house, but it seems like people have found their way here throughout history and have fallen into this. Like in any portal fantasy, you know, sometimes you fall through the portal.
Right.
And it seems like these people were here.
Like there's a child, and I mean, there was not a child working at the university with everyone else. So yeah, there's this idea of like, did they just stumble into this?
And like, Piranesi also wouldn't have survived the past 8 years without Ketterly. On the other hand, Ketterly is the reason he's here. Ketterly has imprisoned him here to use his skill set. It's worth noting. Ketterly learns that Matthew Rose Sorensen is an incredible note taker and keeper of journals, and he's like, you are the perfect person for me to imprison in the house. And at the same time, Piranesi would not have survived the house without Ketterly bringing him shoes and sleeping bags and nets. I don't think the space is able to be inhabited without other people.
It's not built for people to survive in. There's an ocean, and there's sea life in the ocean, and there's water, but it's not a
there's no
space
trees.
There's no
as
trees.
An example.
Yes,
you can't build a fire.
He finds a leaf at one point, and he's like, "Whoa, are there trees in the house?" And then he thinks, what are trees?
What are trees?
Like,
I've only seen trees depicted in the
statues. Yeah, he's like, wait a minute.
Which I think is a very interesting point. I don't know if reading it the first time I noticed how strange it was that you have this character who knows what things are that don't exist in his world. He has all of these concepts in his head, ways he describes things, and you know that he doesn't know what those things are in an experiential way. So it's something that I definitely noticed a lot more the second time, and was like, oh, it's so clear that there's so much more going on, that he must come from some other place. But those inconsistencies, I guess, are kind of erased or brushed aside in his mind, because he just thinks, oh, I've seen them in a statue or something. These concepts just exist, and he doesn't question it further.
I think, like, thinking about isolation too, I think that, like, isolation and the sense of self is a big theme here as well. Not just how one relates to the world, but how one relates to themselves. Piranesi is of course not the character's actual name. The character seems to remember that that's not his name, and that's just the thing that the other calls him. The other is referencing Giovanni Piranesi, who was a real-life Italian artist and architect who sketched at one point a series of obscure, fantastical prisonscapes that are really influential in these kinds of like liminal spaces and those kind of imaginings of that art style. And Ketterle is naming Piranesi this as kind of a joke. But like Piranesi refers to himself as like myself. A lot of the times he doesn't really have an individual sense of like why would he need a name? He's the child of the house. He doesn't need that. And it's just interesting to have him here in this space, identityless.
And he feels so connected to the non-human in a way that I think is absent just in our world. He feels so connected to the fish, to the albatross, and to the dead, and to the maintaining of the dead. I think one of the scenes that stuck with me most the first time I read it, and I looked forward to it and enjoyed it just as much on this reread, is actually after Ketterle's death. He's very, very angry with Ketterle, for good reason, when he discovers what's going on, but Ketterle drowns in a flood during the confrontation, and he says to Ketterle's corpse, "Don't worry, I'll take care of you," basically. And I'm sorry I was so angry, which is not what you did wasn't right. It was, now you are one of the dead and you are part of this house, which means I will care for you. And that sense of connection to the broader world, I think, might be what people miss so deeply when they leave the house.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be a place that creates a strange kind of connection, and like and for Piranesi at least, it created a real sense of empathy in him, which I thought is really moving throughout the book.
Should we talk about the villains?
Yes, the villains in this are wild. Arne Styles is just a jerk, but he has the benefit of being the smart jerk in the book. He created a dark academia cult, basically.
Yes.
Where the
secret history is happening in the background.
Exactly. He's like, I bet you there's this other world that we can get to, and we can find this secret knowledge, and it'll be great. He gets there. He quickly realizes, oh, you can't get the knowledge out of this place. And then Ketterle says, I bet you still can. Arne Styles is like, you're an idiot. And basically he tells Piranesi, like, oh, Ketterle's an idiot. And Piranesi's like, I don't know who that is. Yeah. It's just really funny, the villains sometimes.
Really
it's dark
funny.
but funny.
Arne Styles, Piranesi describes as the prophet,
right.
Yes.
which is so haunting. He is kind of like a cult leadery figure, asking people who followed him to cut off communications with their families, being unafraid to do wild amounts of violence. And it is sort of tied to academia, both because he's a professor and because there is a history of grave misuses of power from tenured professors to their graduate students. Who gets access to knowledge and resources, who does the labor and who gets the credit for the labor, or like active questions within academia. And those show up in this dark mirror sort of Arne Styles.
I think it's also interesting that when Arne Styles does actually gain entrance to the house, it seems like he doesn't want to spend time there because he's afraid of what it'll take from him.
Same with Ketterle, yeah.
But he's perfectly willing to put his students' lives at risk. And he's impressed at how Piranesi has retained like a sense of self. He's kind of shocked, like, you're really well put together for how long you've spent in here, but does not offer to take him out at all.
No.
Because he thinks it's funny. And he thinks it will maybe blow up in Ketterle's face.
He hates Ketterle. I mean, I hate Ketterle too, but I hate Arne Styles just as much.
Yeah.
So moving away from villains, do we want to talk about the context, like the broader context in which this book came out? Because Clarke published Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell to wide acclaim and then sort of disappeared from the publishing world after publishing like a follow-up set of short stories set in the same universe.
So I think this was really interesting. I was looking up interviews with Clarke when this came out, and she actually just came out with a new book this year, so I was reading some interviews that she gave recently. But and I don't know if we mentioned that this book basically came out during quarantine. We were all locked down, and that obviously has some resonance with the premise. And reading it at that time, I think it's even more claustrophobic, really. But one thing that I thought was interesting is, as I'm reading this, she has discussed that having a chronic illness has been one of the things that has changed the way that she has to approach writing. It has affected, her writing, her energy level, her ability to produce work. So this was a smaller work by design, is one thing that she said. But also that as she had been working on it for a while. So this was inspired by a class that she had taken actually on the works of Jorge Luis Borges, who he has a short story collection called Labyrinths, for example, and a story called The Library of Babel, which is about like an infinite library. So I think certainly you can see that influence in the story. So she has all these ideas that she was working on, and then as this came together, I think she said it was actually pretty late in the process that she realized how analogous it was to the experience of having, for example, a chronic illness. And I think I definitely saw that. I mean, not wanting to read too much into it, but just the idea of the ways in which this character is part of the world but separate from the world, and is learning the rules of something different from what other people are experiencing. So I think both the isolation, but also maybe like the ways in which you have to learn to appreciate the world differently.
I think similarly, like, you could even read, if you wanted to do specifically like a disability reading of the book, you could see the tides and the mapping of the tides as like flare-ups.
Yeah,
right. So learning
absolutely.
to read the signs of the world to take care of your own body and your physical safety would be one potential reading.
It's interesting because in Susanna Clarke's description of the book, she says a lot of different things in her interviews about it. And she said at one point that she was inspired, and she wrote a few pages about a huge house with emotion inside it, like a flare-up, like of an emotion. And also she also talked about how, like with Piranesi, the character, she was trying to create a character based on the idea of how people sometimes feel like you're locked inside of your own consciousness, and you're kind of stuck inside your heads, but in the world is like something alien and out there and other. And with Piranesi, she wanted to create a character who was in communion with his world all the time. Mm-hmm. And it comes through.
It does. It really does come through.
It's such an empathetic novel,
yes.
And I think that's one of the things that I like about it the most is, I mean, as we talked about the shift from Matthew Rose Sorensen to Piranesi, but I think there's a real emphasis on empathy, a real appreciation for it, and just showing the importance of it. Even after he's back in the quote-unquote real world, as he sees people, I think, Kat, you had a quote, but just the empathy and the openness that he has to people now that he's back in the world are all kind of taken from his experience within the house.
So this is a quote from the last couple pages of the book, and Piranesi, who now sees, the main character, I should say, who now sees himself neither completely as Matthew Rose Sorensen nor completely as Piranesi, but as some combination of the two or some third person, is experiencing our world and walking around outside. People were walking up and down on the path. An old man passed me. He looked sad and tired. He had broken veins on his cheeks and a bristly white beard. As he screwed up his eyes against the falling snow, I realized I knew him. He is depicted on the northern wall of the 48th Western Hall. He is shown as a king with a little model of a walled city in one hand, while the other hand he raises in blessing. I wanted to seize hold of him and say to him, "In another world, you are a king, noble and good. I have seen it." But I hesitated a moment too long, and he disappeared into the crowd.
I love that quote just because it's an interesting commentary on the book. Doesn't come down hard on like the side of, is the house like an idealized place? Because it's a calm place of isolation and meditation, and Piranesi, the character, comes out of it with the ability to emphasize it such a deep way with people he's never met before, because he sees them in that statue. He sees those statues as like emblematic of work, like the aspect of work, or like gratitude or strength or ability. But he comes out of it and he uses his experience in that isolation, that meditative state, and he brings it with him into his day-to-day life, and is able to apply it in a way that helps him cope and kind of move through it. I'm not sure it's a commentary on meditation or the ability to take things from thinking back on the past or something like that.
Honestly, even a way of empathizing with people through the use of archetypes and the use of fiction, right? So saying someone who you might look at as tired and old and sad and being able to see the best self version of them through art, through art, literally art.
Yeah. I guess before we move on to read-alikes, I just want to take a quick informal poll among the group. Do any of us, would anyone else ever want to go into the house?
Yes, absolutely. I'd go now.
Kathleen?
Pretty much, yeah. I think this is one of the great things that Clarke does, is that there are a lot of arguments for not doing it, but absolutely sign me up.
Yeah, I am fully chasing both of you into that portal.
Yep.
I am literally on your
We've
coattails.
gotten the ritual items. We are ready to go. So read-alikes for this book are very difficult because one of the best things about it is its style, and there's really no other books that do that. So my first recommendation is to go read more Susanna Clarke. You can pick up Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is a wonderful book, much more high fantasy, but it's kind of also a 18th century pastiche. So very stylized, and it's a doorstopper, so it'll take you a while if you're looking for a nice long read. Otherwise, I've got a couple spooky house recommendations. The first is for Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercott. This is a book about a pair of siblings who are dealing with generational trauma in relation to the house that they've inherited, a house which is on chicken legs. It is a wonderful book written by a poet, so it's got very beautiful lyrical writing. I also want to recommend perhaps one of the most famous haunted house or liminal space books, and that is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. This is a book that's also interested in academia, and in satirizing academia, which I wouldn't say Piranesi is much as interested in. It is a fascinating book. There's really nothing like it. Definitely one to look at the insides to see if you're vibing with its sort of unique way of formatting.
It is an experience.
It is an experience
of
of
a book.
a
It is a true experience of a book.
It is unforgettable. And the last thing I want to recommend is a book that I have recommended before, and that is A Stranger in Olandria by Sofia Samatar. And I picked this one because I think if you like Piranesi as a character, you'll probably also like the main character of A Stranger in Olandria. It is similarly masterfully written. It is, however, a high fantasy book. So entirely different world. You're going to have to sort of be a little confused at the world building for the start while you get your feet, but it's absolutely worth it.
All right, so I wanted to recommend Coup de Grace by Sophia Ajram, which actually just came out recently this year, and it has been marketed as the perfect read for readers of Mark Z. Danielewski and Susanna Clarke, so probably an easy pick there. But this is another labyrinthine, liminal space sort of book, and it's more horror, though, so I think I want to give a little warning to people who aren't into as much of like the visceral, horrifying, kind of disgusting books. Maybe not for you, but a really interesting metaphorical story too. So this is experimental horror novel. This character Vicken has really gotten to the point where he's not sure that he wants to live anymore and is just figuring out what that means for him. And he's on the subway in Montreal, what he thinks is a normal subway ride, but when he gets out, he is in this endless labyrinthine subway station, which there are no other people around at first, and it's definitely obvious that something has gone wrong. So he's determined to find a way out again. He runs into this woman who's the only other person around, so they kind of form this alliance trying to explore the rooms, but they're all horrifying. I've never been to the Montreal subway station, but now I don't want to go. This brutalist architecture, not a beautiful place by any means. Everything is gray. Everything is really depressing. So obviously, a very clear metaphor for the ways in which depression can affect someone, and Vicken's mental state is kind of reflected in this place. Not only are these weird claustrophobic hallways and vast cathedral-esque rooms that he's going through, there are also, there's this elevator that may or may not go somewhere, and then all of a sudden it turns into a choose-your-own-adventure. So this is a wild book. I mean, definitely kind of experimental and out there, but if you like just the weird space of the house and you want something that will immerse you in a way that can be very disturbing but also very engrossing and has a lot of interesting metaphorical resonance, I think it's a great book to pick up.
You fully had me at it becomes a choose-your-own
Yeah.
adventure book.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of this book somehow, and I'm very excited.
All right, so my recommendation, a little out there for me actually, because it's more literary. It's Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. This is a book about a conversation between Kublai Khan, the famous Mongol emperor, and Marco Polo, in which Kublai Khan is kind of reminiscing about empire and knowledge and the grasp of empire and understanding with Marco Polo. Marco Polo begins telling Kublai Khan about a variety of different cities that he has visited or knows about. And these cities are all fantastic. They all have incredible elements that are either strange or wonderful, joyous or depressing or somber. And these stories are kind of about like a page, maybe 2 or 3 at most. And then in between these kinds of city stories, the conversation between the emperor and the explorer continue. And as it goes on, it becomes clear that Marco Polo is both talking about something very specific to him and avoiding something. And as the emperor catches on to this and tries to figure out what he's talking about, it's a phenomenal book, one of my favorites. And just the way that the cities are described remind me so much of the feeling that I got reading about the elements and aspects of the house and like the strangeness and the wonder and the majesty of it. Just the way those cities come to life in that book. So highly recommend it.
It's a wonderful book. It's also very short. So
Yes.
if you're at all intrigued, check it out.
Yeah, you've got Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, The Door
Yep,
Stopper.
that's The Door Stopper.
Invisible Cities on top of it. You can use it as your bookmark.
Yeah, there you go. Pretty much. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is very long.
All right, so as I mentioned, we will be taking a bit of a break, but we are coming back in 2025 in February for our last 3 books of the season. So I just wanted to announce our spring lineup. In February, we are doing The Ministry of Time by Cullion Bradley, and that is our romance pick, so just in time for Valentine's Day. In March, we are doing Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. That is our nonfiction pick. And in April, we are reading God of the Woods by Liz Moore, and that is our mystery.
I'm really looking forward to these. I've read all 3 of these already, so revisiting them is going to be fun.
First time reading all of them.
Yep, me too. So I'm excited.
All right, everyone, I think that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.